So it tells you, really, the Chinese are totally inexperienced and they don't want to, unless they have to, they're forced to talk to civil society, including trade unions and NGOs. What they do is to create clients by extending concessional loans, by giving these African governments prestige projects like stadiums, government buildings. And what that does, actually, interestingly, is they empower these African governments, but the workers are very angry because they don't benefit from any of this. It doesn't benefit their salary, it doesn't benefit from their living standard. So all kinds of class discontent, class-based discontent and conflict will be channeled and directed to the government because they see their own government getting very close to the Chinese, being corrupted by them or receiving lots of benefits from the Chinese. And there is a target. They target the state because they see agency of Chinese capital. Now, other kinds of capital, they come in as private companies. You don't feel like you can target them because these are companies. You don't want to work for one company, you go to another company. There is freedom, it's market freedom. But because the Chinese government is so doing all this in such a high-profile way to create an environment for their companies, and they target the state. So class politics is being translated into state politics. So that's why the opposition party in Zambia wanted to run on an anti-Chinese platform because they want to aggregate that kind of class grievance to its own advantage and to vote, to remove the other guy, the other party from power. So because of this kind of state-to-state patronage as one of the strategies of Chinese capitalism there, it generates its own resistance that is much more powerful than other private foreign investors. I'm not sure if I make the point across clearly, but I want to suggest the structural limit or the structural kind of resistance when the Chinese do it in the way they do, which is a state-to-state kind of patronage and alliance. It looks more powerful, but it is not, because it makes itself very vulnerable to domestic political battles and elections. And people don't realize, African politics could be very corrupt, but in some countries, like Zambia, there are real opposition parties. Just 2 weeks ago, the election, I was there. It was very well done. Very little disruption, very little violence. And everybody came out, very happy for the country because 20 years in power is gone through a very peaceful electoral process. So there's some degree of democracy where when a governing party gets too close to the Chinese, they are vulnerable to discontent from below, and that is what exactly happens. And I think the Chinese, which looks like very invincible because it's government-to-government kind of power, actually is not that powerful. It has some kind of structural contradiction that builds into it. It could be more vulnerable than a private South African firms. And so this is the kind of limits that I want to highlight. I think I should stop here and give you time to ask me questions. Thank you. Now there's the election, which if you want to me to talk about it further. But it's very exciting. I was very moved. I almost cried when they successfully removed the MMD party, just the ruling party for 20 years. I went there and everybody was like, I want change, I want change. It's like US in 2008? And also my friend happens to be the vice president of the PF, the party just won, so we're all celebrating. And it's so moving because, it's through democracy. These guys are just able to remove a ruling party which has the media at its disposal. The media in Zambia is even worse than those in China because it's totally a propaganda machine for the ruling party. And they managed to remove that party, and it's just amazing. Okay. Yes.
Two questions.
Yes.
First is about the difference between private Chinese capital and public Chinese capital.
Yes.
Because the local Africans, they don't distinguish it. Some terrible events happen to private. So I wonder, in terms of those conditions you mentioned, like sales managers, and also intensive labor, those conditions apply to both private
yes.
and public.
Yes.
So we can say the behavior patterns are not quite different between them.
Amongst the Chinese in that with that particular on that particular aspect, there's no difference. And I think the reason is because they're all driven by the same kind of pressures building up in China and the same availability of surplus labor. So there's no difference. But the mining sector is better than the construction sector. So I haven't gone into the differences there. But amongst all the contractors, no matter how high they are in the hierarchy of Chinese capital I listed there, basically they have bonded migrant managers at their disposal, and that generates the difference in the bid price, and that's why the Chinese are very competitive. The second question.
Yeah, the managers' conditions are strikingly harsh, even in terms of
even by Chinese standards.
So I just curious, is there any way hidden or public resistance to enhance their bargaining power against the state?
You mean the Chinese?
Yeah.
No, they are.
They just totally hide.
Yes, because they, well, first of all, your salary is kind of docked somewhere. You don't get paid, you don't quit your job, and you don't go home until at the end of a year or 2 years. Most of them don't go home during the 2-year period. And then at the end of the 2-year period, they can decide whether they want to sign the contract again. But because of the pressure of getting higher salaries so high at home, that actually I was surprised. Many of them signed the contract over and over again. So there are people who will be there for 10 years. They go home every 2 years, and they're not protected by unions because many of them are agency workers. So they actually, when they go home, they don't go to see anybody in the company that nominally employ them, the company that actually build these roads and hospitals. So yeah, they're bonded, they're casualized. And I think this is another problem for this mode of accumulation, which is extremely unstable for the critical staff. And I think one of the potential problems for them is how do you then, except using these very draconian and repressive measures, how do you produce, very effectively or productively? How do you motivate these guys? So far, I think it's really the pressure of securing a higher salary that make people feel like they don't have a choice. They always say, well, the whole industry is like this, unless I move to another industry, which is not likely for. They don't want to. They're trained to do that, or they've accumulated so many years of experience. So they don't think of moving out of the construction. And as long as you're there, and all the employers will be, they almost have this same practice, and you can't get away from it. So, yes.
Thank you. It was such a great presentation. Just a comment, and I know you should know this, but in some sense about there's so much hand-wringing that's going on right around here, all those conferences about Chinese investment, and there's a State Department conference in 2 weeks that I'm actually going to go to. But the thing about it's not really correct to say that kind of the West has withdrawn from Africa. It's great that you presented the World Bank in some sense creating the conditions for this accumulation by dispossession, because the West has been there in the form of land grabs, right? Wall Street is all West Africa mainly. But as far as the U.S. is concerned, a little bit native, the militarization of the continent. So Africa,
that's good.
So in some sense, it's not that it's withdrawn.
Yes.
But in some sense, any form of productive capital has been gone, and it's been replaced by complete militarization.
That's good. That's a great point.
And financial speculation.
That's
so that's
productive
which in some sense, those are the rules of the game in Western capitalism right there, whatever neoliberal militarism is.
Yes.
But I mean, Mamdani will say in his recent work that in some sense the terms where the West was in relation to Russia, as far as the Cold War logic in the 50s and 60s, where the Soviets were in some sense a military presence, and that's been completely reversed. Where now China is in some sense committed with all the problematics, all the problems that this turned to something like a developmental project.
Exactly.
As the U.S. and the West was in the 50s and 60s. Now that's completely gone.
That's right.
It's just pure speculation and militarization. And the Chinese are really taking the position of the West.
Thank you very much.
The West occupied in the 50s and 60s.
I totally agree, and actually I have a slide showing there that the way the Chinese is not just state-to-state patronage. They have an entire model of development that they bring with, and that really appeals to African state because, first of all, they empower the state. They said basically, no globalization, no open market, no bilateralism. We do no multilateralism. We do bilateralism. Globalization is kind of a myth. The government is state-led development that they want to sort of sell to the Africans because they themselves have succeeded in terms of using the state as a main agent of development. And the way they actually negotiate, for example, I give you this example to illustrate the two very different paradigms of aid or investment. So the Zambian, and the Zambian official told me, we wanted to build a road linking Angola, going from Zambia to Angola. There's no road. I mean, these are neighboring countries, and Angola is, booming in oil. So they go to the World Bank, and the World Bank won't build that road. The reason is, the World Bank or the IMF, whenever they want to build roads, if you want to build road with their money, they ask for a whole set of statistics, including traffic load. Now, and also HIV/AIDS prevention and gender equality kind of statistics, but traffic load. Only with existing road would you be able to come up with that kind of statistics, which means, and it's true, that World Bank money has always been used to rehabilitate roads rather than build new roads. And this guy went to the Chinese, and the Chinese didn't ask for any statistics, of course, and they immediately understood the idea of development is you have to take the risk of starting something that doesn't exist. Now, so my understanding, and by talking to these people, I understand that it's not so much about human rights, that the Chinese are ignoring, and the Africans like to ignore human rights as well. This guy sitting in his office with an election coming, his time, the clock is clicking for him and say, I wait for these statistics to come through, collect them, and go to the World Bank, and they have to have meetings, on and on. I'll be out of my office by that time that they agreed to build a road, let alone seeing the road being built. But the Chinese could do it very quickly. It's like overnight, and then done. We send our team, and they would finish before the deadline, right? So, and then people see the benefits of the road, and the votes would come. Now that guy, he was kicked out of his office because the party lost the election. But I think his logic is very simple. It's the time frame of two different sets of capital, their requirements, and then most fundamentally, they come in with very different notions of what constitutes development and how you get there. You don't get there by looking at existing statistics or existing activity. You look beyond the reality, the current reality and situation. And that's how the Chinese have done it. I mean, they are willing to take risks, and African governments love that kind of attitude. Yes?
A question about the special economic zones.
Yes.
How much autonomy does the Chinese enterprises have in running those zones?
Yes.
I mean, what are the legal and jurisdictional arrangements, for instance?
Yes.
I mean, what are those zones really mean?
Yeah, that's a good question.
And do other countries have similar arrangements?
Well, the Zambian one will be the first one in Africa. So I haven't looked at the Pakistani. There are a number of zones that have already built elsewhere in the world, but this one will be the first in Africa. This one is where the questions that you asked are very important, and I've just started to look into them. From what I have collected so far, it will be a privately run zone. They're the developer, centrally owned company will be the developer, and they are building roads. They are building housing for the staff and factory premises. They're building them, and there will be a one-stop kind of Zambian department in the zone. So if you want to come in and invest, you don't go to the different labor department, you don't go to the taxation or the custom department, you go to this one particular office to get all your permits. And so do they have